You wake before the sun does. Cold stone floor, dim light leaking through a gap in the hide wall, and the first thing you reach for isn't food. It's a small clay dish of red ochre paste, ground the night before from crushed iron-rich stone. You dip 2 fingers in. You trace lines along your cheekbones, down your jaw, across your collarbone. This isn't decoration for its own sake. This is preparation. Before you leave this shelter, you will be seen. And in a world without mirrors, without language for half of what you're doing, you already understand something modern science took thousands of years to catch up to. You think beauty started with vanity. Most people do. They picture early humans as purely functional, hunting and surviving and reproducing almost by accident, with grooming filed under luxury, a bored afterthought once the mammoth was in the fire pit. That assumption feels safe. It's also almost entirely wrong. Archaeologists have found ochre processing kits, shells used as mixing pallets, grinding stones stained red, dating back over 100,000 years, long before agriculture, long before permanent settlements, long before anything resembling comfort. These weren't scraps of leisure time. Ochre was sourced, carried across distances, and applied with intention during periods of real scarcity. People who could barely guarantee their next meal were still finding, grinding, and wearing pigment. That's not decadence, that's priority. Here's the inversion. Grooming wasn't what humans did after solving survival. Grooming was part of how humans solved survival. Attractiveness, in the deep past, wasn't cosmetic, it was informational. Every mark on a face, every groomed patch of hair, every scar cut with intention, broadcast something to everyone nearby. Health, fertility, status, alliance, danger, already survived. In a world with no resumes and no reputations traveling ahead of you, your body was the only document you carried. People read it instantly, without needing a single word. Start with symmetry, because symmetry is where the story gets uncomfortable. Across cultures with no contact with each other at all, Amazonian communities, Arctic hunters, Pacific Islanders, European foragers, facial symmetry consistently ranked as attractive. Not because they'd agreed on some shared aesthetic over tea. Asymmetry is often a visible record of developmental stress. Parasites, malnutrition, a rough draw of genetics. A symmetrical face reads, on some level beneath conscious thought, as a face that survived childhood without a major biological interruption. You weren't just looking at bone structure. You were reading a health report written in cartilage and skin. Skin told a similar story in a different alphabet. Clear, even-toned skin signaled the absence of active infection and a strong immune system doing its job. This is why cultures with zero contact independently developed skin treatments. Ancient Egyptians used oils and milk baths to keep skin supple and unblemished. Aboriginal Australian communities applied emu fat for the same clarity. Neither group could have known what the other was doing on the far side of the planet, yet they landed on the same instinct. A blemish wasn't just unattractive, it was potentially contagious information. Avoiding a partner with visible skin disease wasn't shallow. It was a survival calculation running quietly under the surface, disguised as taste. Hair carried its own weight, and it carried it slowly. Thick, healthy hair takes months of steady nutrition to grow. Hair doesn't lie quickly. A shining, well-kept head of hair told anyone watching that this person had been eating consistently, had access to resources, had the stability to maintain grooming instead of scrambling hour to hour. Bald patches, brittle strands, dull texture could point to illness or chronic stress. So hair became one of the earliest heavily managed features on the human body. Braiding shows up in figurative art tens of thousands of years old. Combs carved from bone and antler predate written language by a wide margin. Some found in graves alongside the dead, as if grooming mattered even after death. Widen the lens, because attractiveness was never only about the body itself. It was about what the body could prove regarding the world around it. Shell jewelry found hundreds of miles from its source told a story of trade networks and travel, or at least of valuable social connections that reached that far. In parts of ancient East Africa and the Levant, teeth were deliberately filed into patterns, a practice that shows up independently in unrelated regions across multiple continents, signaling tribal identity and the willingness to endure pain for belonging. Scarification, common across many African and Pacific societies, marked rites of passage successfully survived. None of this was random flourish. Every modification was a credential, worn permanently, impossible to fake in a hurry. Look at ancient Egypt more closely, and the pattern sharpens. Kohl wasn't purely cosmetic. It reduced glare from the desert sun and had mild antibacterial properties, protecting the eyes from infection along the Nile. Cleopatra's makeup rituals, heavy with malachite and lead-based pigments, were partly about beauty and partly about signaling divine authority, since only someone with access to imported minerals and skilled artisans could wear a face like that. In Mesopotamia, both men and women used kohl and perfumed oils, and elite Babylonians used gold dust in their hair as a marker of wealth that ordinary citizens simply couldn't reach. Move east, and the logic holds under a different climate entirely. In ancient China, pale skin distinguished the aristocracy from field laborers, and rice powder became a status marker centuries before anyone called it a beauty product. In Heian era Japan, women blackened their teeth in a practice called ohaguro, a marker of maturity and marital status that would look startling by today's standards, but made complete sense inside its own system of signals. The Maori of New Zealand carved permanent moko into the face, each pattern unique to the individual, recording ancestry, achievement, and social rank in lines no one could remove or fake. Different continents, different materials, the same underlying instinct. Make status and health visible on the body, because the body is read before anything else about you. Economics enters here too, quietly but decisively. Resources spent on appearance were resources not spent on immediate survival, which meant visible grooming doubled as a display of surplus. If you had ochre, oil, shell beads, and the time to apply and maintain them, you were proving your basic needs were already met. It's the same logic driving luxury markets today, just wearing older clothing. Scarcity signals value. A carefully maintained face during a lean season said something louder than words. I am worth investing in, because I am already someone others have invested in. Politics folded into beauty in ways that are easy to overlook now. Status wasn't always inherited quietly. It was performed, publicly, through appearance. Leaders, healers, and respected elders across many ancient societies wore distinct markings, headpieces, or paint patterns unavailable to everyone else. Not because imitation was forbidden, but because the materials, the knowledge, or the earned permission required were themselves markers of position. Attractiveness and authority became visually tangled together. To look a certain way wasn't just to be found desirable, it was to be recognized as legitimate on sight. Biology, underneath all of this, was running its own quiet audit. Waist-to-hip ratio in women and shoulder-to-waist ratio in men show up as consistent attraction markers across wildly different cultures, climates, and eras. These proportions correlate with hormonal health, fertility, and physical capability, information that mattered for reproduction long before anyone had words like estrogen or testosterone. Height, muscle definition, vocal pitch, clear eyes, all of it functioned as biological shorthand. Nobody had to be taught. You weren't choosing a partner from an abstract list of preferences. You were running ancient math without knowing you were doing it. Even asymmetric practices that look purely cultural often carried a biological signal underneath. Elongated skulls, achieved through infant head binding in parts of ancient Peru and the Pacific Northwest, marked elite lineage, since the practice required resources and specialized knowledge available only to certain families. Foot binding in later imperial China, painful and permanently damaging as it was, functioned as a brutal marker of status precisely because it announced that a woman's family didn't need her for physical labor. These practices sit at the uncomfortable edge of the pattern. Not every beauty signal was healthy for the individual, but nearly all of them were legible to everyone watching. Here's where the story stops being ancient history and starts being uncomfortably current. Walk into any pharmacy and you'll find an entire aisle of modern ochre. Foundation, blush, contour, concealer, pigment applied to signal health and symmetry, exactly as it was 100,000 years ago. The ingredients changed, the instinct didn't. Skincare routines chasing clear, even-toned skin are the same immune-signaling behavior your ancestors performed with plant oils and animal fat. The methods got more scientific. The underlying language stayed the same. Gym culture follows an identical blueprint. Muscle definition, broad shoulders, visible strength. These aren't new obsessions invented by fitness influencers with a ring light and a protein shake. They're the modern expression of the same shorthand your ancestors were reading off each other's bodies by firelight. A well-built physique still signals competence and resource access without a single word being spoken. The barbell replaced the spear. The signal transmitted stayed exactly the same. Even teeth whitening, which looks like a purely modern vanity, traces back to older instincts. Bright, healthy teeth have always signaled nutrition and youth. Ancient Egyptians used a paste of pumice and wine vinegar, Romans, oddly enough, used urine for its ammonia content, believing it whitened enamel. The specific method changed. The motive never did prove, visibly, that the body inside is functioning well. Social media filters might look like the newest chapter in this story, but they're arguably the oldest instinct wearing the newest disguise. Smoothing skin, enhancing symmetry, brightening eyes. These tools automate exactly what ochre and oil did by hand thousands of years ago. The platform moved from cave wall and firelight to a glowing screen held at arm's length. What the viewer wants to hear stayed the same. Tell me quickly that this person is healthy, capable, and worth paying attention to. Jewelry hasn't lost its ancient function either. A wedding ring, a luxury watch, a designer bag, these aren't purely aesthetic choices. They're status credentials, direct descendants of imported shells worn by someone whose trade network reached farther than the neighbors. You're still reading resource access off strangers in seconds, the same way you always have. You've just swapped shell beads for stitched leather and animal fat oil for serum in a glass bottle with a minimalist label. Even fashion trends that look arbitrary usually carry a biological echo. Tailored clothing that exaggerates shoulder width in men or waist definition in women isn't a modern marketing invention. It's a costume built around the same waist-to-hip and shoulder-to-waist ratios your ancestors were reading off bare skin. High heels alter posture and gait in ways that emphasize curvature. Padded shoulders exaggerate a frame. Contouring makeup carves the illusion of stronger bone structure using shadow and light instead of a chisel. Every trend cycle claims to be new. Most of them are just the oldest signals wearing whatever fabric happens to be fashionable that decade. This is the part worth sitting with. You might assume modern beauty standards are shallow constructs, invented by advertising and disconnected from anything real. Some of that is true. Specific ideals shift by decade, by culture, by market forces chasing your attention and your money, and plenty of trends really are arbitrary noise. But underneath the shifting surface sits something startlingly consistent, something your ancestors would recognize instantly if they walked into a modern gym or a makeup aisle. Symmetry still matters. Clear skin still matters. Visible health, visible resource access, visible effort spent on the self, all of it still functions as a silent report, read by strangers in seconds, exactly the way it always has. What does this mean for how you see yourself right now, scrolling past filtered faces and gym transformation photos? The impulse to groom, to adorn, to signal health and capability isn't vanity layered on top of your humanity. It's stitched directly into it, older than agriculture, older than cities, older than most of what you'd call civilization. The instinct to be seen, and to be seen as worth something, isn't a flaw modern culture invented. It's a survival strategy your ancestors refined in caves lit by firelight, one you're still running today, mostly without noticing. Maybe that reframes the mirror a little. Every time you reach for concealer, every time you choose a shirt that fits well, every time you catch yourself standing straighter in a room full of strangers, you're not performing something artificial. You're continuing a ritual tens of thousands of years old. The tools changed. The ochre became foundation. The bone comb became a hairbrush. The shell beads became a watch on your wrist. But the person doing the reaching, the checking, the adjusting, that person is doing exactly what their ancestors did at the edge of a fire 100,000 years before anyone thought to call it beauty.